I've been on a bit of a kick for mixed DPS tank hybrid builds, largely because these builds are ideal for doing random TFOs on your own, particularly elite level TFOs. Especially if you're doing these elite randoms on your own, just teaming up with whoever else is in the public queues. And while in my initial review of the Princeton class, I did say that it was probably the most disappointing of the 4 new ships, it still has its uses, and it being a full Miracle Worker ship with a command seat, a mixed DPS tank is definitely going to be the best setup for this ship. And actually, its console ended up being surprisingly good for this too. So, fun fact, that intro you just watched and the outro that you'll see at the end were recorded 5 days ago. I've had a lot of delays with this video related to both stuff that happened in-game as well as my own real life, the latter of which I'm not going to get into. But the in-game stuff is that I've had to basically reconstruct this build multiple times at this point because of stuff that was bugged and then fixed, only to find more stuff that was also bugged that I had been using the whole time that I didn't know was bugged. So I'm going to try to speed this one along as much as I can because I just want this video to be over. Anyway, the Princeton. During my initial review, I did refer to this ship as the big disappointment of the 4 new ships. And I still stand by that. The other 3 ships all had something pretty unique going for them, whereas this was just an ordinary cruiser with bad seating. But at the same time, I have enjoyed flying this ship just because of, 1, its unique appearance. I know just looking at it makes you want to ask, is that a third nacelle or are you just happy to see me? And not everyone's into that, but I like it. It's funny, it's kind of goofy looking, I'm into it. And the other reason I've been enjoying this one is because of a surprise that came in the form of its console, which has proven to be surprisingly good. During my first impression review, I had written off Fractal Integrity Bleed as just some annoying gimmick console that really wasn't going to serve much purpose, but I'm getting 40 to 50k out of this thing in ISE. And that's just in random ISEs. I haven't gotten the chance to get this through a proper supported run. Like I did with the Atlantis build video, I left the decision on what build I put on this thing up to you guys. The poll being a choice between a DPS tank hybrid using fire at will, or a lazy boat using all turrets. And I'm actually glad that the damage tank hybrid won, because 1, this is a build style that I'm growing more and more interested in because of the presence of elite random TFOs. Being able to dish out a sufficient amount of damage while also being able to take a sufficient amount of damage is proving to be a much more valuable skill than anything else when it comes to the random elites. So you're going to see a number of things that are similar to what I did on the Legendary Akira build that I made that was specifically tailored for random elites. But with this specific build on the Princeton, I went a little bit more toward the high end just to overcome some of its shortcomings. However, if you'd like to find some more budget-friendly alternatives to the gear or traits that I'm using, go check out that Legendary Akira video I did. For this actual build on the Princeton, this is going to be a broadside fire at will mixed DPS tank build. So we're going to be shooting a lot of different things at the same time, hopefully dealing enough damage to actually kill them, while at the same time being able to survive the damage that they are dealing to us. For the weapons, I went with my typical phaser stuff. Actually, a lot of this is going to be really similar to that broadside fire at will build I did on the Lexington a while back. So we've got the Terran Task Force beam array, a pair of narrow angle phaser beam arrays. These are like normal beam arrays, but they're a bit more powerful in exchange for their firing arc being a little smaller than your standard beam array, having only a 210 degree firing arc rather than the standard 250. But 210 is still more than enough that you need for a broadside build, so the trade-off for the extra damage is definitely worth it. Sadly, these beam arrays are exclusive to the Constitution 3. In fact, these and its starship trait Thunder Run are the only reason to get that terrible ship. Thank you again to the person who so kindly gifted me the Constitution 3 back then. But obviously, if you don't have these, you can swap these out for normal beam arrays. More phaser beam arrays in the back. I'm using Agony just because they're what I have. Really, you can use whatever phaser beams you like. With a tank hybrid like this, pulse phasers would actually be really good because of their ability to increase your own damage resistance while decreasing your enemies. But like I said, use what you got. The Omni is the Trilithium Enhanced Phaser Omni, which is here for its chance to give a haste buff to all your other energy weapons. And because this is a broadside fire at will build, of course we've got the Wide Angle Quantum Torpedo. Still really wish we can get a proper extension trait for fire at will so we can use something like a Maelstrom Torpedo on fire at will, but for now, this is what we're stuck with. The usual stuff in the core set, we've got a Protomatter Deflector from the Fleet Colony, the competitive engine for the speed buff, which is actually really nice because I'm running with minimal engine power on this thing. That's because all my leftover power is routed to auxiliary for the sake of Fleet Power Network. And of course the Discovery 2-piece to gain access to that extra hull regen because this is a tank hybrid. The devices, again, pretty standard. We got Energy Amplifier for the bonus damage to energy weapons, Deuterium Surplus for another speed buff, Reactive Armor Catalyst for a secondary heal, just in case you need it, Kobayashi Maru Transponder for the random buffs, Subspace Field Modulator from some extra damage resistance, and Flagship Distress Frequency Transponder to give me the chance to summon in an Odyssey class, which always makes me smile. In the consoles, the first standout things you're going to see are a bunch of ISO-mags and a bunch of these Protomatter consoles. These are pretty self-explanatory at this point. The ISO-mags are here to buff my phaser damage, as well as my weapon power, and the Protomatter Matrix Infusers are also buffing my phaser damage, but they're also here for the passive heals they provide. I've also got the DPRM on here, which I know, high-level premium lockbox console, I know it's going to be expensive to get, but it really does help on a build like this. It gives a big buff to your damage output, but if your hull is too low, then that turns into a massive hull regen buff. It helps you kill things and it helps you stay alive. It really is a win-win with this thing. And it really pairs well with the console that comes with this ship, Fractal Integrity Bleed. This was the console I was talking about earlier that proved to be quite the surprise. What it does is deal a significant amount of radiation damage over time to multiple targets surrounding you. That damage will scale based on your current hull levels. But at the same time, you'll also receive some of that radiation damage to your own ship as well. If your hull drops below a certain level, it'll just cut off immediately, but the whole point is that you want to stay alive to get the most out of this console. That's largely where the DPRM is coming in. Its massive buff to hull regen really does help compensate for the massive amount of radiation damage you're going to be taking in. Because the radiation damage you're receiving isn't just a normal dot. You can't just apply hazard emitters and it'll go away. That'll stay there as long as the console is active. And it's immune to normal damage resistance, so the only way to overcome it is just direct heals. The Protomatter consoles and some of the other things I have in the build are going to help with that, but you really want one big massive heal over time to compensate for the drain on your hull that this console will be making. The DPRM is probably the best choice to fit in for that mixed damage tank hybrid setup, but if you don't have that, you can go with something more heal focused like the Protomatter Field Projector, or something else that applies a really good heal over time. Actually, if you have other suggestions for heal over time consoles like that, leave them in the comments. And it's gotta be a hull heal too, because radiation damage bypasses shields entirely. But while this console is costly to use, it is dealing out a good amount of damage. Like I said, I've been getting 40 to 50k DPS with just this thing. Now, that's not enough for me to call this a meta console. It still takes a lot to actually get this thing up and running for you to not die while it's active. But it makes for a unique theme for the ship that is more than adequate for getting you through most elite level content. The other consoles we've got on here, first is Fleet Power Network Array. This is off of the Awani. This was one of the big delays for this video, because while I started working on this build, this console was still bugged. I wanted to use the console, but I didn't want the bug to interfere with the testing, so I decided to go without it and use the Domino as a placeholder. But then it got fixed, which is great, because yay, now it works as intended and is still a very powerful console. But it also meant I had to retest and re-record a bunch of stuff, which was annoying. Now I just sound like I'm complaining about a console being fixed. That's not what I'm trying to do, I'm just really tired, I'm sorry. Anyway, we've also got Tachyon Net drones, which gives some passive buffs to crit chance and crit severity, and its clickability is a nice AoE for a damage resistance debuff. I probably should have swapped this out and kept the Domino after the Fleet Power Network Array got fixed, but I didn't want to pack on too many premium consoles onto the build. Whereas this comes off a nice little C-store ship, the Bozeman. Down here is the Shield Absorptive Frequency Generator, which basically functions as a passive shield heal. I used this on that Legendary Akira build as well. This is a solid console if you want to improve your survivability. It's only a shield heal, so it won't help against that radiation damage from the Fractal Integrity Bleed, but it will help out with the damage coming from enemy ships. This comes off of the Tier 3 Valdor. And finally, we got Experimental Power Redirection off of the Excelsior 2, which I know what I said about not wanting to pack too many premium consoles onto the build, but come on, you know I love this console. Fires beams in every freaking direction, it's great, I love this thing. For the skill specializations, I'm going with my usual setup for Intel as my primary to gain access to Space Flanking, and Temporal Operative as my secondary to gain access to Entropic Rider. But as always, if you prefer Strategist as your secondary, that is a perfectly viable option. Moving on to the personal traits, again, we're going to do this like we usually do. A lot of these are just my usual setup for an energy weapon build, so I'm not going to go over every single one in great detail, and instead just put most of them up here on the screen so you can know what they are. But I will point out the one change I made to my personal traits for the sake of this build, and that is Living Hull, which I am using to further buff my hull regeneration. I've made a similar change in the Space Reputation traits as well. Instead of Controlled Countermeasures down here, I've got Energy Refrequencer for an additional passive heal. In the Starship traits, again, is a lot of the usual suspects. First is Entwined Tactical Matrices off of the Gagarin Miracle Worker Battlecruiser. This one is obvious because this is a Fire at Will build. You kinda need this to keep Fire at Will up 100% of the time. Then we've got Emergency Weapon Cycle, Calm Before the Storm, and Overpowered and Overgunned, all here because they give haste buffs. Haste is always important on any kind of energy weapon build. Ship of the Line for its stacking crit severity buff. Definitely a good trait to have because with this much engineering seating, you definitely have room for 2 emergency power abilities. Temporal Tunneling off of the Atlantis, which is here for even more haste. And for the last trait, originally I was playing around with Flagship Staffing for even more haste. That comes off of the Awani. But that's where one of the other delays for this video came in, because it turns out that Starship trait is also bugged. Just like the Awani's console was doing before it got patched, Flagship Staffing is also lowering the cooldowns of Universal consoles when it shouldn't be. I did not know this until recently, so I had to find a different trait until that's fixed. I started looking at more haste traits, like Weapons Hot Deflectors to Full, or Strike from Shadows, but I've already got 4 different traits dedicated to haste, so I decided to shake things up a little bit and lean more into the tanking side of this DPS tank hybrid. This is Unified Engineering off of the Baran Command Dreadnought. A few people brought this trait up in the comments for the Legendary Akira build video and the Awani build video I did recently. And honestly, reading the description now, I can't believe I didn't use this for either of those builds. Like, I knew this was a good tanking trait because of all the buffs that it gives just at the click of auxiliary power to structural integrity. It also works with command abilities, which I did have initially, but I'll go into why I decided not to use those later on. But yeah, Unified Engineering also applies these buffs to your teammates as well as hangar pets. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't use this on either of those, because it's great for keeping you alive, it's great for keeping pets alive if you have them, which obviously I don't on this build, but in those other 2 videos that I talked about, I definitely had pets on those. And the buffs apply to the whole team, so it's good for keeping them alive as well as you, making it really nice for random elite level TFOs. This is what I get for being so hyper-focused on min-maxing DPS for all these years. Can I blame that on Augie? Probably not, but I'm going to anyway. So in earlier tests of this build, my bridge officer seating was quite a bit different, especially in these top 2 seats. Originally, I was using this universal seat as a tactical seat in order to make room for some command abilities over here. Specifically, I was using Concentrate Firepower 2 for some extra torpedo damage, and Suppression Barrage 1 in order to debuff enemy damage. So I had Torp Spread, Attack Pattern Beta, and Fire at Will 3 over in the Universal seat, and I had Chemocyte Lace Weaponry in that Ensign seat. But that left the build very light on unconventional systems triggers, only leaving 3. 2 of which are Eject Warp Plasma and Emit Unstable Warp Bubble, both of which have rather long minimal cooldowns. This wasn't a problem initially because I had Flagship Staffing, which is bugged, and is resetting the cooldowns on Universal consoles. Once I realized what was going on, it actually explained a lot, but at the same time it left me with the problem of not having enough unconventional systems triggers to lower the cooldowns of my Universal consoles. Part of the reason I wanted to keep the command seating was because Flagship Staffing says it triggers off of command abilities. What it doesn't say is that Flagship Staffing only triggers off of certain command abilities. From what I could tell, it was only triggering off of command abilities that also heal you. The Starship trait never triggered with Concentrate Firepower or Suppression Barrage, but it did trigger with Rally Point. It might work with Overwhelm Emitters as well, but I never got around to testing that. I didn't see the point in continuing to test it while it was still bugged. In fact, it not triggering with all command abilities might in and of itself also be a bug. We won't know until it gets fixed. Anyway, back to the seating. Since I ditched Flagship Staffing, I decided to ditch command seating altogether on this build because I really needed the unconventional systems triggers. So the Universal seat became a Science seat in order to make use of Jam Targeting Sensors, Scramble Sensors, and Gravity Well. I also kept Unstable Warp Bubble and Eject Warp Plasma just for the sake of more unconventional systems triggers, but you could trade Eject Warp Plasma for Mixed Armament Synergy. Also in the engineering seating, we've got Emergency Power to Weapons to trigger Emergency Weapons Cycle and Ship of the Line. Auxiliary Power to Structural Integrity Field is here to trigger Unified Engineering. Definitely need that there because I'm not using any command abilities for the reasons I stated earlier. Narrow Sensor Bands to buff my energy weapons because this is still an energy weapon build. Emergency Power to Engines to give me a bit of a speed buff, as well as to trigger Ship of the Line and the Emergency Con Hologram. And then in the singular Science seat, we've got Tractor Beam to trigger unconventional systems. Alright, now let's watch me drag this thing through a random ISE, and then we'll look at the combat log.
Scanning the data. Go.
398k. It's about 100k better than I thought this thing would do. Though I did get lucky with this random ISE and got teamed with a group of people that actually knew what they were doing. Always nice to see. You can see I had the most heals out, which is to be expected because this build needs a lot of heals in order to actually function. Kinda surprised I didn't have more attacks in, given that this is a fire at will build. But like I said, I did get lucky and got paired with people that actually knew what they were doing, so that's probably part of that. I'm not sure how, but my fire at will definitely misfired at least once, because this much damage from the phaser array actually outdoing fire at will 1? Something may have been screwing with ETM. I'm not sure what though, it is odd. Fractal Integrity Bleed came in at just under 40k, but as I said, I've been able to get this thing up to 50k. It really just depends on how well you can keep everything clustered together. I think someone was in here using Agony Redistributor as well, because I should not have that much pet damage. Nope, I just checked, none of them were using it. Maybe it was something to do with the Fleet Power Network array? It's the only other thing I could think of that would affect pets, but at the same time, I thought that only affected other players' pets if I actually used the console on them. Which I didn't, I only used it on myself. I don't know, maybe someone more observant than myself has an idea of what happened with those pets. So yeah, that is my mixed DPS tank hybrid on the Princeton class. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you found this build helpful just because, like I said earlier, these mixed DPS tank hybrids, they're really ideal for doing random elite TFOs. Jumping into the random queues, you really can't rely on someone to be playing as a dedicated tank just because who knows who you'll be paired with. They may not even know what they're doing. I've played a few of those runs where people just have no idea what they're doing. It happens, it sucks, but you know what? The best thing you can do is be prepared for it, and this is one way to help prepare for it. And while the Princeton really isn't the most ideal platform for this setup because its seating does still leave some things to be desired, at the same time, it really just goes to show you that it's much more about the gear that you're using than the ship that you're flying. So yeah, let me know what you thought of the build down below in the comments, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you would like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member, or if you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701, or if you're ever shopping for Star Trek models on real merch, be sure to use my discount code, which is also STU1701. Either of those help me out a lot, and I really do appreciate it, but either way, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.